For 50 years, the Nobel Conference at Gustavus Adolphus College has hosted preeminent scientists, theologians, and ethicists to discuss deep questions in the intersection of science and society. From the newest results in physics, chemistry, and biology to the newest fields of multidisciplinary study, scientists at the Nobel Conference have examined the universe at its largest and smallest scales, explored the oceans, and described new materials. Conference speakers have debated the mechanisms of aging, as well as science and economics of food. Often, speakers have given us a glimpse of the next big questions and how they might be answered. Throughout all of the conversations, ethicists and theologians have grounded the science in a human dimension. The 50th Nobel Conference at Gustavus is celebrating a half-century of bringing breakthrough science to lay audiences in the upper Midwest, across the country, and recently around the world. Nobel Conference 50 is assembling previous Nobel Conference participants to look at recent advances and future directions in the physical sciences, evolutionary biology and ecology, medicine and physiology, and the intersection of science and public policy. Harry Gray is the Arnold O. Beckman Professor of Chemistry and founding director of the Beckman Institute, California Institute of Technology, Pasadena. Dr. Gray helped pioneer the field of bioinorganic chemistry, and his research on electron transfer, ET chemistry, has provided insight into structure and long-range electron transfer in proteins. We hope you enjoy this year's presentation by Harry Gray entitled Solar-Driven Water Splitting.
Well, thank you, Brandy, for that nice introduction. And Woodburn is bigger today than it was when I was born there. It was only 100 people. There were no stoplights. There was only one street light. But the citizens of Woodburn, Kentucky didn't like to pay taxes. So they had a referendum on the street light. It was $2 a year tax on the street light, and they didn't like to pay that. Every eligible voter in Woodburn voted, and the street light lost 26-0. So now my hometown doesn't even have a street light. Well, I first want to thank Brandy for introducing me and for shepherding me through this. I also want to thank my handlers, wonderful Gustavus students, Anna and Colleen, for taking care of me these days. This is a really wonderful conference. I've had a fabulous time. As someone said, there's nothing like this anywhere. I've given a lot of talks, but nothing like this one. And so I want to start by really giving a shout out to the person who's put this together, and that's Scott Burr. And I want you all to join me in thanking Scott for everything he's done. Now, I like to know what my audiences are interested in before I talk. So I'm going to ask you guys to tell me what your main interest is. And you can be old, you can be young, you can be middle-aged, you can be any color or any religion. I don't care what you are. I want to know whether you're interested in physics, that's one choice. Chemistry or biochemistry, that's a second choice. Biology is a third choice. And because my friend Gary Ernst is here, I'll give you a choice of geology. And then the last choice is other. So I want to hear it from you right now. How many of you folks, and you really give me a real shout out, how many of you folks are really interested in physics? Well, I'll give Steve Weinberg a call and tell him it was a pretty good shot. How about chemistry or biochemistry? How about biology? How about geology? All right, Gary, you got some people here, Gary. How about other? I guess I just heard from the lawyers. All right, I'm going to talk to you about my solar army and the problem facing us on this planet of making renewable energy. And the talk is going to be really a recruiting talk, because I'd like to end up after this talk of having a lot of new recruits for my solar army. The sun is a great resource. There's an enormous amount of capacity, enormous amount of energy, and we have to figure out how to convert it into useful energy, useful fuel. As Steve Chu said, we'd like to convert it to transportable fuel, liquid fuels. But the problem is even bigger than that. As Gary Ernst said, we have to think ahead, 10,000 years, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 years about what this planet's going to look like. And we only have a few really resources that we will have forever, and one is the sun for energy. Second one is seawater. The third is nitrogen from the air and oxygen from the air and carbon dioxide. These are the things that we have to work with. And we're not only going to have to make fuel from sunlight and water, we're going to have to make materials. We're going to have to convert carbon dioxide and nitrogen into useful beginning chemical materials that we now get on the cheap from oil, gas, and coal, because I can tell you the oil, gas, and coal are going to run out at some point, or they're going to get so low we won't be able to use them. Maybe not in this century, maybe not in the next, but in 1,000 years, we're going to have to figure out really how to do what nature has given us for free. We're going to have to figure out how to do it ourselves. And I like to say that my power source, the sun, my nuclear power plant, is a safe 93 million miles away. That's why I like my nuclear power plant, giving us all those photons, and we've got to figure out how to do it. Now, as Steve Chu pointed out, we do have technology now to convert sunlight into electricity using photovoltaic devices, so-called solar cells. And some time ago, Nate Lewis and I drew a map of the country to figure out how much space it would take to run the entire country on solar electric. That was a few years ago, but we picked out a part of the country where nobody lives. Right there. We can cover that area where nobody lives with solar cells and run the entire country on solar electric. And if people who are in the audience now live there, I'll be happy to meet with you later and arrange to move you to Las Vegas. So see me later if you're in this. Of course, we're not going to do this. This just goes to show you about how much land we would have to cover with 10% silicon photovoltaics to run the country entirely on solar energy. What we're doing, of course, now, and we're doing it more and more every day because photovoltaics are getting cheaper and more efficient literally every day. What we're doing now is we're covering the tops of parking garages around the country. We're putting solar panels in wasted spaces. And to give you some feeling for that, here is a 1 megawatt solar array at the Los Angeles Harbor. What is that gives you a feeling for how big it is. What does 1 megawatt mean? Well, let me tell you, this kind of array, if we had 20 of those, we could run my institution, Caltech, completely. You could probably run Gustavus Adolphus with 5 or 6 of these. So, it's not impossible to think about doing this. And as a matter of fact, a few universities, including mine, are rapidly putting in this kind of capacity. We're covering parking garages at Caltech with solar panels and generating electricity, selling it to Los Angeles during the day and buying back power at night. Arizona State has converted completely to solar electric, and many others are moving in this direction. But when the sun goes down, the electricity goes off because we don't have storage. Steve Chu pointed that out, and we desperately need storage. So what we've got to do is to convert sunlight, say in seawater, split it into hydrogen and oxygen, use the hydrogen where we need it, and also use it to reduce carbon dioxide to make liquid fuels. So where do we stand on this? Well, I'd like to say that 33 years ago, I wrote a paper in Science laying out the territory and what needed to be done in this area to make it happen in artificial photosynthesis. Brandy pointed out that nature solved this problem a billion years ago, but we've got to figure out how to do it in a robust way using artificial materials, using materials that we have. Maverick and I wrote this paper in Science 33 years ago laying out the rules and what we need to do fundamentally to make this happen. And then I trained a whole bunch of really brilliant students. And my students, who are wonderful, love to show me up, as Brandy pointed out. And two of my students, Nate Lewis and Dan Nocera, who are not only brilliant but slightly arrogant, absolutely love to show me up. So they thought this paper of mine wasn't good enough. So they wrote a big, long, additional paper pointing out what needed to be done. But when my students do this, I come along later and write a better paper. My papers are shorter. This is only one page. So if you have to read anything, I will advise you to read this one-page thing to get the gist of this. Of course, I'm just kidding. I love my former students. I love them all. They're great contributors, and they've made enormous contributions to this. I really show this slide to give a shout out to the Turner Lab at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, because John Turner's lab in the late 90s really showed us we can actually do this. We can build an artificial photosynthetic device to split water, to make fuel from sunlight and water with high efficiency, relatively high efficiency, over 10 times more efficient than natural photosynthesis, which we've been living off from the beginning of civilization because of all the oil, gas, and coal that came from it. Turner's group built a solar cell with a tandem semiconductor device for light absorbers to absorb all the blue and green and red light and split water into hydrogen and oxygen, giving hydrogen fuel. And the only problem with that device is it's too expensive. It's got really expensive materials in it, and it can't be scaled up. Nate and I estimated it would cost about at least $10,000 a square meter to build this device of Turner's. And the goal in this field is something like about $100 to $200 a square meter for a device that could be scaled up. So we're going to have to build it out of cheap materials, earth-abundant materials. This device of Turner's is full of platinum. It's full of platinum. And platinum is rare. It's expensive. We'll run out of it soon if we tried to scale this up. Besides, we have better uses for platinum. Jewelry. Best-selling albums. We need platinum. We can't afford to use platinum to split water. We got to get something else that can be scaled up. So at this point in time, I decided to go back to the solar energy field, which I had been in much earlier, to go back in with a gusto and recruit people to work with me with the goal of building components that would allow us and engineers to build a device that would split water into hydrogen and oxygen with high efficiency, but could be scaled up because it would be built with cheap, earth-abundant materials, materials like iron and cobalt and nickel and molybdenum and tungsten. So we started this activity. And in solar fuel science, what you need to do is to get rid of the arrow first. You need light absorbers. After light, you have to have efficient light absorption. After efficient light absorption, you have to have a very efficient charge separation, what we call electron-hole separation. You can do this in molecules, but you can do it even better in semiconductors. Semiconductors allow these first two pieces here to be done together in one solid state device. And so our focus is on developing semiconductors, but they will only then, after light absorption, separate one electron from one hole. Chemistry is a multi-electron, multi-proton problem. And water splitting involves many electrons and many protons. So you need catalysts. You need catalysts to gather the electrons and the protons and put them in the proper places so you can rearrange the bonds in water to make hydrogen, fuel, and oxygen, to split water with sunlight. The catalyst will do that after being energized after light absorption from the sun. So our program, our solar fuel science program that I started in the late 90s, is devoted to developing these light absorbers and semiconductor light absorbers, charge transport systems, and interfacing them with catalysts at their surfaces. And this is a very, very important problem because at the interface, you never know what's going to happen. You can have very good light absorbers and semiconductors. You can separately have very, very good catalysts. But when you stick them together at the interface to make an integrated device, an integrated component, either a photocathode or a photoanode, the properties at the interface may change, and likely will change, and you have to figure out how to optimize these interactions in order to move forward, and that's been the activity we've been working on for the last 15 years. Now, I gathered together a strong group to work on this problem, shown here. These are my principal investigators. This is funded by the National Science Foundation. I found some experts in all aspects of this problem. You can see them here. They're around the world. I hesitate to point out here, there's a whole bunch of people in Wisconsin, and nobody... Oh, there are Wisconsin people here. Well, shout it out. You're there. Well, I do need some Minnesota people, so at the end of this talk, I hope I'll get some interest in people joining our group in Minnesota. What we do in this whole operation of principal investigators is work on light absorbers, catalysts, interfaces, membranes, all the components we need so that engineers will be able to make, really build, construct really working and cheap solar energy conversion, fuel-forming devices. We designed, at the early days of this, we designed a device to work on that could work with cheap materials. Now, the difference between working with cheap materials, earth-abundant materials like iron oxide, and working with single crystal and silicon and so forth, is that after light absorption, the electrons in the holes don't move very far apart in cheap materials. They're disordered. And so they tend to recombine to make heat, and we've got to get these electrons and holes to the surfaces. For example, in the photoanode up here, we've got to get the holes to the surface after blue light excitation. And so we'll build a red photoanode up here out of some kind of substance like tungsten oxide, to give you one example, and make it into these micro rods that are about 300 microns long. They're long and skinny. They're long and skinny because we need to absorb all the light going down the long direction, but we need to get the holes to the surface so it's skinny in this direction because we can't move them very far after excitation. Same is true in the photocathode, which is a silicon microrod. We make these silicon microrods, and the red light that then comes through after absorbing the blue and green up here, the red comes through, and the red excites the silicon band gap. We want to get the electrons into the surface with high efficiency so they can meet a proton with a catalyst to make hydrogen. So oxygen up here, hydrogen down here with a membrane separator. That's the device model. Now, I'll tell you where we are along the way, because we've gone a long way of building these devices now, these integrated components. First, the catalyst to replace platinum at the cathode. When you think about cheap materials, earth-abundant materials, as Brandy would point out, you think about what nature did, because nature couldn't afford to use platinum. Nature had to use iron to evolve hydrogen. There are enzymes called hydrogenases that are very, very active at catalyzing the reduction of water to hydrogen. But if we put these protein molecules on our silicon photocathodes and start irradiating, they're very fragile, and they irradiate away in a few minutes. So we can't use them. For a while, we thought we could just take the active sites out. The active sites are these nice inorganic complexes. We could take them out and use them on our silicon photocathodes. But one lesson we've learned in 35 years of working in bioinorganic chemistry is when you take the active sites out of a protein, they don't work anymore. They need the protein interactions inside the protein cavities to work properly. And a good rule of thumb is if you take a redox center out of a protein, its potential, the potential at which you could evolve hydrogen, changes by about 1 volt. And that's just too much. We can't reach that with solar energy. So lots of people are working on this problem now. Bioinorganic chemists all over the world are trying to synthesize these biomimetic centers that will work, but we're not quite there yet. So what we did was we started a worldwide effort of just synthesis of new materials with catalysts just from inorganic compounds, cobalt, nickel, and iron mainly, some molybdenum. And with this worldwide effort, we've now ended up with about 40 working catalysts, 40 working homogeneous catalysts for hydrogen evolution that work really quite well. And the Caltech Hall of Fame is here. These are the ones that were developed at Caltech and studied at Caltech. These two cobalt compounds, this cobalt one here, this one here, these two compounds have been used to study mechanism and understand how the hydrogen is evolved, which then led to the synthesis of this one and only iron-containing compound that actually works at very, very low so-called overpotentials. That is, essentially as well as the biological thing, essentially as well as platinum. So let me say a little bit about this, because we think as chemists that if we actually understand how a reaction works, the so-called mechanism of the reaction, we can actually build something better based on this knowledge. This, of course, is rarely true. However, in this one case, it did work. We figured out how these two cobalt one works, and then we figured out from the lessons we learned how to build this iron system. Let me take you through that. There was a French group here and an American group here who simulated the so-called catalytic waves that you get in hydrogen evolution from this cobalt catalyst. And with exactly the same experimental results, they came to completely different conclusions. Of course, it's France versus US. You would expect that. The American mechanism starts with cobalt-2. At the electrode, it's reduced to cobalt-1 with one electron, picks up a proton to make a cobalt-3 hydride. The cobalt-3 hydride reacts with itself. Two cobalts come together and split off hydrogen in the so-called homolytic mechanism, returning it to cobalt-2 and coming back in this catalytic cycle. That was the American mechanism. The French said, no, 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 you Americans never get it right. They weren't from Minnesota, they're non-Minnesota Americans. They said, you can take this cobalt-3 hydride and just protonate it off directly to make hydrogen and end up with cobalt-3, which you can then come back in by electrons into the cycle. Well, then there was some American work that showed that cobalt-3 was not produced at all in this cycle, thereby showing the French were probably wrong. There was brief, parties in the US celebrating this, figuring this mechanism, the American mechanism, had to be right. However, about this point, I got a call from a theoretician. I usually get calls from theoreticians telling me I'm wrong. And this was no exception. The theoretician, who shall be unnamed here, called me and said, Harry, by the way, both these mechanisms are wrong. This cobalt hydride is not reactive enough to do either one of these things. You need one more electron. You need an electron to reduce this to a cobalt-2 hydride. And after being very upset for a day, I recovered. I thought about it, and I said, it's possible this theoretician is right. They're sometimes right. So we did some more experiments, and sure enough, we showed that this is the dominant mechanism. You need one more electron in this than we thought. And so it's really this mechanism. This changed our thinking. We needed one more electron in our complexes to make them really catalytic than we thought. So then we designed, based on this knowledge, we designed the first iron catalyst, shown here, iron at the center. We put in these ligands, these groups around called ligands, with heavily fluorinated, all sorts of fluorines, which allow us to add the extra electron we need into these ligands. And so we have now made a very, very powerful and active iron-containing catalyst that will evolve hydrogen at low order potentials that we can incorporate in these devices. But as good as these homogeneous catalysts are now, and they're very, very good, it's likely in the long run they won't last because they contain organic components. And our devices have to be robust. They have to work for hours and hours and hours without degradation. So it's likely that we'll have to use solid-state materials not only as the semiconductors, but also as the catalyst. And so we have engaged in the last few years in a campaign to make new solid-state catalysts to evolve hydrogen. And the good news is we've got 3 solid-state cheap materials that are as good as platinum in evolving hydrogen. The first one was a nickel molybdenum nanopowder, shown here, that can be made by reduction of nickel-amine and molybdate in solution. It's very, very active for hydrogen evolution, and it's very stable. You can run for hours. At Penn State, Ray Shack has made a nickel phosphide by pyrolyzing an organophosphorus compound in the presence of simple nickel salts at high temperatures and getting this black nickel phosphide nanomaterials that you can drop cast on electrodes to get very, very active hydrogen evolving systems. And finally, one that we're working on at Caltech, an analogous cobalt phosphorus compound, black compound that operates essentially as well as platinum and under many, many conditions of acid and base. So the report at this stage, is very good. We have got photocathodes now with materials on them, on silicon, that are just as good as platinum in evolving hydrogen. So we've made enormous progress in this area. The challenge, of course, is water oxidation. We have to get the electrons and protons from water. We can't afford to get them anymore on the cheap from oil, gas, and coal, as has been pointed out. We've got to get them from water and from seawater. So our best working photoanode is made of tungsten oxide. But the problem with plain old tungsten oxide is its band gap is too high. It's 2.5 electron volts. And we have to tune it down. The sweet spot is 1.9 electron volts, where you can absorb all the blue and green light that you need to absorb. But we figured out how to do that. We have been able to make a tungsten oxide which incorporates a molecular nitrogen, N2, right in the middle of it by a really shrewd synthetic technique. So shrewd that none of the referees believed we'd made what we'd made. And so our paper was rejected. Because when you do something that's really new and exciting and unusual, your papers are usually rejected. So we decided to send our material to Berkeley and get Berkeley to lay the hands on it, because if Berkeley says it's right, it must be right. So we sent it to Berkeley, and they said, "You're right, Harry, you've got the nitrogen in there, just like you said, to lower the band gap." And what it does is it turns tungsten oxide from yellow with a band gap of 2.5 to red with a band gap of 1.9. It allows tungsten oxide to absorb all the blue and all the green light and split water. It's a big breakthrough. But they wouldn't let us publish it, even with Berkeley, because they said when we came back with the Berkeley laying the hands on it, they said, "Well, nobody believes Berkeley, they're too liberal." So we sent it to Brookhaven. We sent it to Brookhaven and got some fancy measurements made at Brookhaven. Once the Brookhaven people said it's right, we got it published, and there it is. There's the nitrogen vibrational fingerprint, both in 14 and 15N. As you could easily see in our first paper, we had dinitrogen in there. I don't know what the problem was with the referees, but that's what you live with nowadays. Well, so with a really good photoanode now in the sweet spot, we now need better catalysts. We need better catalysts, and the best catalyst, of course, is from biology, as Brandy pointed out. The one that we've been living off of is this manganese, this odd-looking manganese oxocalcium cubane with this manganese on the side that is poetically called the dangler manganese. This is a really terrific water oxidation catalyst, but there's no way we can figure out how to make that properly and functional. Although inorganic chemists now are starting to make things that look almost like this, but they will still have to tune them into the sweet spot in order to get function. And we want to get there first. So at this point, I decided that there is a water oxidation catalyst out there yet to be discovered. It's going to be the best water oxidation catalyst ever, much better than the natural one. It's probably going to contain 3, 4, maybe even 5 different metals and be a metal oxide. So what do? I'm going to search for it. I'm going to start with the periodic table. I'm going to rope off a few elements that I think are potentially great to search in this space. I'm not sure now why I decided on this. space. Because after we started this, all sorts of students pointed out that this was stupid and they should search elsewhere. That's okay. But now we have to cross out all the ones that work because they're too rare. So we can't work on these. We're going to make metal oxides out of these combinations. We're going to make robust catalysts like rocks. And if there are only 2 or 3 metals, there are millions of combinations. And if there are 4 or 5, there are billions of combinations. So what do? I got to search. I've either got to search with robots or with students. And I don't like robots. And I like students because they fight back. They're motivated. They're terrific. And they tell me I'm wrong when I'm wrong. And I like that. And so I started the Solar Army. By the way, when you start working with students, they will Photoshop you into everything. So here we go. We start with the U.S. government, which occasionally closes. Fortunately, they fund the National Science Foundation, which funds our CCI Solar Group. You saw the university research groups, but now in addition, I add to those research groups brigades, Solar Army brigades made from college students and high school students all over the world. I now have recruited hundreds in the so-called SEAL program. We have a Harpoon program. We've got a Shark program. We've got a number of programs that are dedicated to just searching for new materials using high school kids and college kids. I now have thousands of kids worldwide searching for new materials. You can give me a... Here's where the brigades are in the U.S. and North America. These are all brigades. These are all high school kids working after school as an after-school activity. I'm looking here. I see some folks in Minnesota. That's awesome. I want some more. What do? Well, we search for new materials, and the first big hit was made at Grinnell College in Iowa. A gal by the name of Stephanie Chung, a junior at Grinnell College, found that if you add yttrium, the element yttrium, to a known zinc-iron catalyst, it gets much, much better for water oxidation, much more efficient. Naturally, the photograph was taken by the 2 professors who left Stephanie out of the picture. So I called her up and I said, I don't want to talk to the professors. I want to talk to you, Stephanie. Tell me how to do this. And she did. She told me how she did it. And so that summer, I got my group, my brigade together. Here's a bunch of high school kids. By the way, here is James McCone from St. Olaf College, Minnesota, down the road here, who's been a real pioneer in all of this work and is the one who developed the nickel molybdenum nanopowder and has been a general, a 5-star general in my Solar Army, directing these kids in the front who are high school kids. The high school kids this summer checked all of Stephanie's work and showed that her yttrium addition did make a very, very good water oxidation catalyst. Taught us a lesson that adding lanthanide elements have great potential in this area. We not only checked her out and found that we could make 4 new catalysts based on her discovery at Grinnell College, but we also decided we'd go big time in this and make a working Solar Army kit. So that summer, we designed a working kit that we could distribute worldwide. And here it is. You start with metal precursors you can get in any high school. We supply conducting glass. You spot it on conducting glass and pyrolyze it in an oven to make an amorphous metal oxide on conducting glass. Then you determine the photoactivity with an 8x8 LED scan station that we designed at Caltech and built at Caltech to supply to all of our brigades. So they can slap this 8x8 metal oxide plate onto the 8x8 scan station, turn on the lights, and the red and green and all the different colored lights come on. We have this hooked up to a electrochemical rig reading out current and voltage, and at certain current and voltage conditions, we are pretty sure we're splitting water. And so they can then, at their workstations, here's the 8x8 plate on the LED scan station. Here's what they see at their workstations on the 8x8. They can see in real time, right after high school when they're working on this, they can see which materials they have are really very active, photoactive. And so they post these then on the Solar Materials Discovery website, which we can access in our big operations at Caltech and MIT and Harvard and so on. All of our principal investigators can look and they can see, wow, look at that one. There are a lot of big hits there. And so what the kids are doing, and then they get together. We have a SEALCon. Some people have Comic-Cons. We have SEALCon, where this is just the Southern California brigades getting together once a year, presenting their work to us, telling us what things are working, what's not working, what are good possibilities for catalysts. And then what we do at Caltech is we bring those in and we have a way of formulating them into very active nanoparticle catalysts with the ideas of the elements that we need to put in coming out from all of our high school kids in the Solar Army. I like this audience. Hey, you guys are going to get with me up there, I know that. So what we do is we take the ideas and we have a very nice way we got lots of big lasers. So we have a method called pulse laser ablation in liquids that we formulate these materials into nanoparticle catalysts. And here's the way it works. We train a high-powered laser onto a metal target with one metal that's the main metal that we want to put in the catalyst. And we put the other metals in solution, an aqueous solution around, and we hit this with a pulse laser and literally explode the target because it has enormous energy, so we basically explode it into a plasma. We generate a plasma out of this laser targeting, a plasma at 5,000 to 10,000 degrees Kelvin under high pressure with all the components that the kids out there have told us we ought to have a look at. These systems then cool into beautiful nanoparticle materials, quantum confined, in which we can vary the size of the nanoparticle with the laser pulse energy and the laser pulse width. For example, with a 90 pulse millijoules per pulse, we can get a 2.5 nanometer, very regular nanoparticle. With higher pulse energies, we go to higher nano. So we can tune in the size of this nanoparticle with pulse energy and pulse width. They're quantum confined. Bulk cobalt oxide, for example, is black, but our 2.5 nanometer tiny nanoparticles are yellow because they're quantum confined. But let me tell you, they're great catalysts. There's lots of surface area, there's lots of active sites, and we put them on substrates to make photoanodes. They're tremendously active for water oxidation. We've made a whole bunch of these now. The best one in the world. This is the world's best water oxidation catalyst now, made by pulse laser ablation in liquids with either a nickel or an iron target, added the other one in solution, as well as a little bit of lanthanum, an idea we got from the Solar Army, and a little bit of titanium, another idea we got from the Solar Army. This four-metal catalyst, this so-called double-layer iron-nickel hydroxide with a little lanthanum and a little titanium in it, is a fantastic, robust water oxidation catalyst, the best in the world now, and as a matter of fact, better than the natural catalyst. We now have the 12 world's best water oxidation catalysts made interestingly, from ideas that came from high school kids. And if you want to read, I'm going to wrap up now. If you want to read about this, I've written with James McCone and Nate Lewis, we've written this cute paper called Will Solar-Driven Water-Splitting Devices See the Light of Day? And in this article, if you want to read it now, we analyze the three different kinds of architectures that are under discussion. First, the simplest one, where we have the technology right now, is to take the world's best photovoltaic devices and simply wire them to the world's best electrolyzers. Using now our catalyst, our new catalyst in this way, and using from the physics community and the applied physics community, the world's best photovoltaic devices. This we can do right now. This, of course, is what we've been working on, a wireless device with a membrane separator in which the photoanode and the photocathode are separated into compartments. And we're still working on this, but we're getting close to something that we could now troubleshoot and some efficiency to see how it works. And then, of course, the cheapest operation is just to embed our catalyst and our photoanode, integrated photoanodes and photocathodes into some kind of matrix together. It'll be very, very cheap because there's no membrane. When we radiate this, we will co-generate hydrogen and oxygen and hope that it doesn't blow up. Because it probably will. But if you want to read about these three things that people are working on around the world, this paper, and also in our membrane work here, Paula Hammett in MIT has now made the first transparent membrane for this work, another breakthrough. So it's all good. There's hope. And I'm very proud of the alumni in my solar army. These are all mentors. I wouldn't have the space to show you the thousands of high school kids who are working, but they're there. I've showed you some of them. These are all the mentors from our program at the institutions who have mentored high school students in this activity. And here's where they are now. In academic places, they're now everywhere. They've learned how to mentor kids in their own academic careers. I'm very proud of our alums. They're also in industry and in government. It's a great group that I've had the privilege to work with over these last 15 years. I have an advisory board from industry and government and academic places. I've got advisors from oil companies because they will be transitioning to big energy companies sometime later in this century, and they're following these solar energy programs very closely, and they've been quite supportive. That's the good news. Finally, we have an annual meeting at a hotel in California where everybody gets together, all the principal investigators, a selection of our high school kids and college kids, everybody presents. It's a great activity, and my feeling is that if us, the old people in this, don't solve this problem, I am very happy I'm recruiting the people who in the next 50 years are going to solve this problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harry. Life is full of trade-offs, and it seemed like everybody was with that talk for a long time, and the downside of that is that we're really running late. So I think instead of a question and answer right now, we should adjourn to lunch, and we will take questions for Harry at the next session as well. So thank you.